Warning: Theory and Practice does not endorse violence, terrorism, or any form of political action. This program exists to summarize and explain historical documents, theories of psychology, and political trends. The views expressed in the following materials are not the views of Theory and Practice, and this video is for educational purposes only. Hello, this is Theory and Practice. I read the obscure political manuscript so you don't have to. Now that we've gotten the disclaimers out of the way, let's talk about accelerationism. What is accelerationism? Accelerationism is a theory which has gained some popularity over the past few years. It states that in the event of a political system becoming too corrupt or impenetrable to be salvaged, individuals opposed to it should work to hasten its demise by encouraging socially deleterious and destabilizing aspects of that system. One example of this idea can be found in some far-right circles, who at times encourage voters to choose left-wing candidates over conservative ones. Their fear is that ineffectual center-right rule would serve only to boil the frog slowly, placating nationalists and failing to address their chief concerns, while their opponents continue to grow in strength. A radical left-wing power, they argue, would incite a sufficiently radical right-wing opposition, or at the very least, the degenerative social effects of leftism may well destroy the civic culture and by extension the political system itself. This would, in theory, allow a hardened core of right-wingers to build a new society from the ashes of the old one. Some even go as far as to advocate the spread of drug use, sexual deviancy, intersectional bickering, or anything which may cause the body politic to break down. Also note that many leftists themselves believe this, as the inversion of all tradition and morality is seen as necessary to deconstructing the white male patriarchy. The difference between these two camps, of course, is their belief in who would win the inevitable civil war. But accelerationism isn't particularly new or even limited to left-right politics. The core assumptions of accelerationism can be found in another set of strategies: terrorism. Please note that I am not saying that accelerationists are terrorists, but terrorism, whether acted out in Baghdad, Christchurch, Dresden, or the Gaza Strip, is fundamentally accelerationist. To examine this further, let's take a look at the Management of Savagery, the most critical stage through which the Ummah will pass. The Management of Savagery was written by Abu Bakr Naji, the head of media and propaganda for Al-Qaeda. It is an instruction manual for those seeking the establishment of an Islamic State. To summarize, the book contains two main sections, what the author calls vexation and the other management. We'll touch upon management briefly, but it's a topic too big for one episode. Abu Bakr Naji comes from the perspective of a non-governmental actor, a terrorist, acting within the borders of an established secular state. What the author wants is to demolish that existing state by exhausting its resources, pitting its citizens against each other, and facilitating the collapse of organized society. Without a government, there is no security, no infrastructure, no services, and an overall degraded standard of living. Sorry, end caps. This devolved form of civilization is what the author calls savagery. From there, he and his people can step in and manage the savagery, providing food, medicine, and policing, making themselves the new authority on which people depend. Finally, through the expansion of the management bureaucracy, the dissemination of propaganda, and the implementation of new laws, an Islamic State is at last achieved. To summarize, the terrorist creates problems for which he himself can be the cure. He has, in essence, broken a man's legs, so that man may be grateful when the terrorist gives him a pair of crutches. If this sounds familiar, you may well remember the ways in which ISIS came to govern large tracts of Iraq and Syria. As I mentioned, we're not going to be covering the management aspect of the book, as that mostly has to do with the development of bureaucracy. Today we'll just be looking at vexation operations, which really encapsulates what most accelerationists are referring to. Now, vexation itself has two main components: exhaustion and media strategy. Note that most terrorist organizations lean towards choosing civilian targets for both, as they are the path of least resistance. But state assets and personnel are targeted whenever convenient. So as far as exhaustion goes, the name speaks for itself. Either destroy or spread thin the state's resources in order to reduce its concentration of force and overall effectiveness. The Houthi drone attacks on Saudi oil fields come to mind, as even though the installations will be rebuilt, the security increases needed will put further strain on an already struggling Saudi economy and military. To put this on an even grander scale, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq are exactly the sort of bottomless pits Al-Qaeda hoped the United States would pour all of its blood and treasure into. With local governments either spread perilously thin or pulled back to protect only the most vital of economic targets, the insurgent gains free reign over the greater part of the lightly or undefended nation. From there, the morale of the people becomes the primary target. Moving into the second step, the media strategy seals the fate of the previous social order. On the public side, a series of escalating operations will communicate both a sense of momentum on the part of the rebels, engender a disdain for a government unwilling or unable to protect its citizens, and promote a more localized feeling of trust and dependency. An us versus them mentality allows radicalism to flourish, as small, isolated communities are easy prey for those claiming to have all the answers. This new guarantor, by demonstrating an ability to protect the public and avenge its fallen, creates a sense of in-group loyalty, the basis of power, or al-shaka as the author calls it. In the case of state actors, Nagy suggests employing a very Alinskyite strategy of trying to appear larger and more fearsome than you really are. Fears of horrific, brutal reprisals will keep government forces from pressing on an insurgent group too hard. An atmosphere of terror may even convince a significant number of low to mid-level troops that their paychecks simply aren't worth the risk. Some may even choose to join their local community, and in doing so become part of the insurgency they previously fought. No better example of this exists than in Afghanistan, where individuals could jump back and forth between serving in Northern Alliance government forces and the Taliban multiple times, depending on who was occupying their village at the time. With the non-compliance of the public and a regular stream of defections, the state will ultimately wither and die, at last reducing society to a state of savagery. The new group moves in and begins the process of management, offering security, food, medical, and educational services, eventually becoming the new de facto state. Now, it's unclear whether or not these tactics actually work. While some groups like the Taliban appear to succeed, the overwhelming majority of them are crushed. ISIS, for example, reached something resembling the management stage, but has since been reduced back down to the status of roadside bandits. And even these are but studies in the use of violence, saying nothing of the more degenerative social tactics promoted by Western accelerationists. Perhaps a Benedict option, the formation of intentional communities isolated from the mainstream, would be a better use of one's time and energy. That is, if the state permits such a thing. Maybe each strategy has its own circumstance in which it must be deployed. At this point, it's difficult to say. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to discuss accelerationism and its alternatives a little more in depth in the next episode. For now, I'd like to thank you for joining me. You can find me on Twitter at Theory_Praxis, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video, and be ready for more episodes soon to come. See you next time.